Good Monday evening and welcome to Overtime here on WOTM. I am Gerhard Mathangani, joined by our expert researcher / historian, Mark Everett Kelly. He's got some great numbers for you as it relates to the baseball playoffs. Of course, the Atlanta Braves that we've been keeping up with all year, he's basically called their second half of the season, now find themselves in the Fall Classic. They'll be playing the World Series. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. But Mark, first, let's go to college football. We'll have our picks a little bit later on, but let's talk about what we saw on Saturday. A really interesting dynamic between Alabama and Tennessee. We knew going into this it'll be an improved Tennessee football team. They had a lead at halftime, but Alabama comes back to win it 52-24. What were your observations from Saturday night?
Well, I think most people, when they watched Alabama's defense against Tennessee, you got the thing where they were allowing big plays. So you took away that they probably didn't really play very well.
Right.
But if you look at the number of possessions that they had on defense and how they did for the majority of those possessions, they stopped Tennessee the majority of the time. It's just that they allowed a couple of big plays, which you're not used to seeing Alabama doing.
Right.
The other thing is you're not used to seeing the miscommunication that you saw there. And Battle and Job, these are guys, senior and junior, these guys aren't supposed to have that kind of miscommunication where you see guys like wide open running through the secondary. When you consider that Herndon Hooker became the second quarterback in the Saban era to have 2 touchdowns and 50 yards or more in a single game. Kyle Trask did it last year in the SEC championship game. That, to me, was shocking enough. So you're not used to seeing Alabama give up big plays.
Right.
But if you examine overall how the defense did, you can see it tells us a little bit different story. Nobody likes the big plays, and that's something they really have to work on because they can't continue to allow that to happen. They can't continue to allow the miscommunication, and I think that's what Saban's talking about with some of the, but these are, again, our guys that have been there for a while. That's what kind of confuses me, and I think that's what concerns Saban. So that needs to end, and it needs to end now because that sort of thing can't happen against Georgia.
Exactly.
Okay? Maybe against Tennessee you can get away with it, but you're not going to put 52 up on Georgia and give up those big plays.
Exactly.
So if you see Alabama's defensive possessions, 14 defensive possessions against Tennessee, in 8 of those possessions they allowed 10 yards or fewer. In 2 of them they allowed between 10 and 20 yards, one of them between 20 and 40 yards, and then those 3, 60 yards or more. 214 of the 346 yards that they allowed were on those 3 big plays because they also had a 39-yard pass completion early in the first quarter. So those are the types of things Alabama needs to get better, especially as they move toward these last couple games of the year, taking on LSU next in a couple weeks. That they have to really address during this off week.
Exactly. It's a bye week, and then LSU. Meanwhile, Bryce Young won the SEC Offensive Player of the Week. Your thoughts on the way he performed it last week?
Bryce Young has played very well. I mean, he became, the first Alabama quarterback to rush for 100 yards, throw for 300 or whatever those combined numbers were. And like me and my, Rico, a good friend of ours, who knows Alabama just as good as anybody, always says, hey, if Bryce Young ran the ball more, he would do really well. But I don't think it's that he wants to pass for more yards. I just think he probably doesn't want to take the hits that some guys you've seen take. And maybe his first choice is to throw the ball. But that doesn't mean he can't run the ball because he really can't. I like to see him run when it's there. When it's not there, you can either, don't force it. But definitely, if he runs when it's there, he's going to bring a lot more to this Alabama offense where you have to pay more attention to not just the passing game, which has been outstanding for him. I think he's like second in the SEC, only 3 interceptions, so he's not really making that many mistakes. But I mean, again, Alabama fans are used to seeing Tua and Mac Jones, who had 1 interception through 8 games. Tua 1 year had 25 touchdowns before he threw an interception. So he's not that yet, but I have to see him getting there.
Exactly. Meanwhile, a team that's coming off rest is the Auburn Tigers. They faced Arkansas last time we saw them, and then they got a huge win in Fayetteville. Now they're back against a really good football team, playing very good offensively, and that is the Ole Miss Rebels. Auburn, like I said, coming off the bye week, played really well. I think probably their most complete game in that win over Fayetteville. We'll have maybe that rust versus rest factor. What do you expect to see from the Tigers coming up on Saturday?
Well, look, what really shocked me with Auburn this year is how many yards they've allowed rushing. And when you think of Ole Miss, you don't think of a team that can run the ball.
Right.
But you think of a team that's dynamic offensively, what we say are they're first in the SEC in yards per game, but they're also first in the SEC in rushing yards per game.
Right.
And you wouldn't think of the guys that are up there among league leaders. There are none of them. Matt Corral, who leads Ole Miss in rushing, is 11th in the SEC.
Right.
Then you have Henry Parrish. He's 16th in the SEC. Snoop Connor, 18th in the SEC. And Jerry and Ely, 20th in the SEC. All those guys have rushed for at least 300 yards and 2 touchdowns. We have Corral and Connor with 9 touchdowns each. When you look at how Auburn stopped the run, they haven't. Even against Arkansas, they allowed a lot of yards to Arkansas, who, let's face it, they do run the ball well. So you expect them to run it no matter who they're playing. But against Georgia State, that was their weakness. They allowed over 200 yards against Georgia State. Against Georgia, they allowed a lot of rushing yards. And we'll be able to see that in the graphic about how Auburn, when they don't stop the run, they're susceptible to losing. Now, also consider that Ole Miss, again, first in the SEC in rushing yards, 263 yards a game. That would be my concern for this game. However, you have two teams that in that West are going to beat up each other. Auburn's 2-0 against LSU and Arkansas. Ole Miss is 2-0 against LSU and Arkansas. So now they play each other, and the winner of this game has the heads up, and that advantage. They don't have to worry about them anymore. Put them behind them, and then move on to the next, the Mississippi State. You know, those types of teams to get to that Alabama game where they want to be with just that one loss in the SEC.
Exactly, and we'll pick this game coming up a little bit later in our program. Meanwhile, going across the state of Alabama, other teams that we keep up with here on our program, the UAB Blazers lost to Rice. It was homecoming there in Birmingham, losing to Rice, a bit of a shocker, 30-24. They're dropped to 5-3 overall, 3-1 of the conference. They're off this week, and they'll have La Tech coming up next week. Meanwhile, South Alabama, 4-3 overall. They also fell at UL Monroe by 10. Next up, they'll face Arkansas State next Saturday. Meanwhile, Jacksonville State play the number 1 team in the country in FCS football. Lost 42-7. Grabbed the early 7-0 lead there, but lost. They're now 3-4 overall and 1-1 in the AQ7. That's a part of the combination of the WAC as well as the A-Sun. They'll play Central Arkansas coming up next. Sanford 3-4, 2-3. They lost against Chattanooga in a blowout, 55-13. Coming up next, they're at VMI. And Troy coming off the bye week. And this week, they'll play on Thursday against number 24, Coastal Carolina.
One other thing about Auburn and Ole Miss. The last time that Ole Miss scored 30 points against Auburn was 2014. The last time they scored 40 or more was 2012. Auburn's won 5 straight, 7 of 8 in this rivalry. So they have the heads up. And this explosive Ole Miss team could really lay a beating on Auburn for the first time in a while if they're able to execute running the ball well.
Exactly, and I think so. And like you said, Auburn's been susceptible defensively against the run. So we'll see how Auburn does coming up this week. Meanwhile, also with the teams that you see on your screen that are playing this week, as we talked about earlier, Bama on a bye. And coming up next week, UAB will be on a bye as well. Meanwhile, high school football coming up on Thursday night, we will have some action for you. Oxford will take on Central Phoenix City in the AHSA AWOTM Game of the Week. It is the season finale. It's hard to believe. Mickey Shadricks and I will be on the call. You can catch that game on WOTM as well as My 68. 6A Oxford, 7A Central Phoenix City. Central Phoenix City has the brother of Bo Nix as their starting quarterback, and of course their father, Patrick Nix, is the head coach of the Red Devils. John Holder will be talking to them, and you'll see that right here coming up on WOTM on AHSAA Weekly. Should be a really fun time as we close out the season on the Thursday night games of the week right here on WOTM and My 68. Well, coming up next here on Overtime, we will talk baseball. Mark has been all over the Atlanta Braves, and he called so far what we have seen transpire here lately. The Braves coming up next in the World Series. We'll discuss next.